Montana Territory, 1878. A rifle shot cracked the air like thunder splitting a tree, and Isaiah Evans dropped to a crouch behind the water trough. His heart hammered against his ribs as he peered around the weathered wood, searching for the source of the gunfire. At 25, he'd learned that survival in Silver Creek meant treating every unexpected sound as a threat. The dusty main street remained empty except for a few tethered horses shifting nervously at hitching posts. "Just some fool celebrating," muttered Hank, the livery owner, from the doorway of his stable. Auction day brings out the worst in men, especially when they're liquored up before noon. Isaiah straightened, brushing dust from his denim trousers. Auction's not for 2 hours yet. Some folks start drinking the minute they decide to bid on something. Hank spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dirt. Or someone. Isaiah's jaw tightened. He'd been in Silver Creek only 3 months, but that was long enough to learn about the special merchandise occasionally sold at the back lot behind Murray's trading post. The thought turned his stomach. Men, women, sometimes even children, sold to the highest bidder under the thin pretense of indentured servitude. The law looked the other way, especially when the victims were Chinese, Mexican, or Indian. "Thought that business was finished after the war," Isaiah said, adjusting his hat against the bright morning sun. Hank shrugged. "War ended some things, started others. Town marshal can't be everywhere." Isaiah nodded, though the excuse rang hollow. The truth was simpler. Marshal Perkins chose where to look, and the back lot wasn't one of those places, especially when Murray slipped him a percentage. "You planning to bid on anything today?" Hank asked, changing the subject. "Just a horse if the price is right." Isaiah needed a sturdy mount for ranch work. The small spread he'd purchased south of town came with a weathered cabin and 20 acres of decent grazing land, but the previous owner had taken his horses when he left for California. "Might find something decent," Hank offered. "Heard Murray's got 3 Mustangs coming in from that Ute trader." Isaiah nodded and continued toward the general store. His mind wasn't on horses now, though. It was on the auction's darker purpose. In his short time working ranches across the West, he developed a philosophy that served him well: avoid trouble, mind your business, and never get attached. The frontier was no place for heroes. It chewed them up and left their bones to bleach in the sun. A man lived longer keeping to himself, yet something in him couldn't ignore what happened at these auctions. Perhaps it was his mother's voice, still clear in his memory, though she'd been gone 10 years now. "Indifference to evil is evil itself," she'd often say, quoting some preacher from back east. The general store bell jangled as he pushed through the door. The familiar scent of coffee, leather, and dried goods greeted him. "Mr. Tanner," the proprietor, nodded from behind the counter where he was measuring flour for Mrs. Peterson. "Morning, Isaiah. What brings you to town?" "Need some supplies, and thought I'd look at the horses at the auction." Tanner's expression dimmed slightly. "Just the horses, I hope." Isaiah understood the unspoken meaning. Tanner was one of the few townspeople who openly disapproved of Murray's special merchandise, not that his disapproval extended to action. "Just horses," Isaiah confirmed, moving toward the shelf of canned goods. 2 hours later, Isaiah stood at the edge of the crowd gathering behind Murray's trading post. About 40 men milled around the makeshift auction block, a flatbed wagon with boards laid across it. Most were locals, ranchers, miners, and townsmen. Others were clearly passing through, rougher types with hard eyes and hands that never strayed far from their weapons. Jonah Murray, a barrel-chested man with a voice that carried across open prairie, stepped onto the wagon. "Gentlemen, welcome to our monthly auction. We've got fine merchandise today: 3 Mustangs from the Western Territories, farming equipment from the Haverson estate, and some special items for discerning customers." The way Murray's eyes gleamed at special items made Isaiah's skin crawl. He watched as the first horses were led out and bids called. The Mustangs were decent stock, wild-eyed but strong. Isaiah bid on the second, a dun gelding with good legs, but dropped out when the price climbed past $30. He couldn't justify the expense when his ranch was barely breaking even. As the regular auction concluded, several men drifted away, but most stayed, forming a tighter circle. Murray lowered his voice. "Now, gentlemen, for our special offerings. First up, we have a fine worker from the Orient, answers to Lee, good with laundry and cooking." A Chinese man was pushed onto the wagon, his hands bound before him. He stared at the ground, his face revealing nothing though his shoulders curved inward. Isaiah felt something twist in his gut. He turned to leave. He'd seen enough when a flash of movement caught his eye. Near Murray's storeroom, a young woman stood partially hidden behind stacked crates, watching the proceedings with undisguised horror. Even in the shadow of the building, her beauty was striking, golden hair pulled back in a simple braid, fair skin flushed with emotion. She wore a modest blue traveling dress, dusty at the hem as though from a long journey. Something about her arrested him, not just her beauty, but the fierce intelligence in her eyes as she observed the auction. She couldn't be more than 22, yet she carried herself with a dignity beyond her years. For an alarming moment, Isaiah wondered if she might be waiting her turn on the auction block. The thought spurred him forward without conscious decision. As he approached, her gaze snapped to him, wary and alert. Up close he could see her eyes were a vivid green, currently narrowed in suspicion. "Ma'am," he said quietly, tipping his hat, "are you in some kind of trouble?" She straightened, lifting her chin. "What makes you think that, sir?" Her voice held the refinement of Eastern education, but with steel beneath the polish. "Most ladies don't frequent the back lot during auctions," he said carefully. "Especially not this kind." She studied him, seemingly measuring his character in that piercing gaze. "And what kind would you call this, mister?" "Evans, Isaiah Evans." He glanced back at the auction block where bidding on the Chinese man had reached $15. "The kind decent folks pretend not to notice." Something in her posture relaxed marginally. "I'm Elizabeth Thornton, and no, sir, I am not merchandise, though I appreciate your concern." The bitterness in her tone was unmistakable. "Then what brings you here, Miss Thornton? This isn't a safe place for a lady alone." "I'm looking for someone." Her gaze returned to the auction. "My father's former housekeeper, Ming. She was taken from our home in Denver 3 weeks ago." "I have reason to believe she was brought here." Isaiah frowned. "Taken, you mean kidnapped?" Elizabeth nodded, her expression grim. "Father died 6 months ago. After the funeral, I discovered his business partner had embezzled most of our money. When creditors took our home, Ming stayed to help me, though I couldn't pay her wages. Then one night men broke in. Her voice caught. They said Ming would cover my debts. That she'd fetch a good price out west." The injustice of it struck Isaiah like a physical blow. "And you tracked her here, alone?" "I had little choice." The Denver authorities weren't interested in helping a Chinese woman. Her jaw tightened. "I sold my mother's jewelry for train fare. I've been following rumors for 3 weeks. Before Isaiah could respond, Murray's voice boomed out again. "Now, gentlemen, a special treat. Fresh from Denver, we have a fine Chinese woman, trained in household matters and, I'm told, quite skilled with a needle. Bidding starts at $20. Isaiah turned to see a small woman pushed onto the wagon. Though her black hair was matted and her clothing torn, she held herself with unmistakable dignity. Elizabeth gasped beside him. "That's her, that's Ming." She started forward, but Isaiah caught her arm. "Wait," he cautioned. "Rushing in there will only get you hurt." Her eyes flashed. "I can't just watch her be sold like cattle." "And I'm not suggesting you do," Isaiah's mind raced, "but we need a plan." "How much money do you have?" Elizabeth hesitated, then reached into her reticule and withdrew a small purse. $17.38, everything I have left in the world." Isaiah reached into his vest pocket, counting his own money. "I've got $23 and change, not enough for a bidding war." "Then what do we do?" The desperation in Elizabeth's voice cut through his customary detachment. "Let me think." Isaiah watched as the bidding climbed to $25. A heavyset man in a miner's jacket seemed most determined, repeatedly raising his hand. In that moment, Isaiah felt the comfortable wall he'd built around himself, the one that whispered to mind his own business, to avoid entanglement, begin to crumble. This woman's desperate journey to save someone she cared about challenged everything he thought he believed about survival in the West. "I have an idea," he said finally, "but it's risky and you'll need to trust me." Elizabeth looked at him, searching his face. "I don't know you, Mr. Evans." "No, you don't," he agreed. "But right now, I'm all you've got." She drew a deep breath, then nodded once. "What's your plan?" "First, we need a distraction." He scanned the crowd, noting the positions of Murray's men, two burly fellows with pistols poorly concealed beneath their vests. "When I give the signal, I want you to scream as loud as you can that someone's stealing horses from the front corral." "And then what?" "Then you stay out of sight while I get to Ming." He hesitated. "Do you have somewhere to go if we succeed? Somewhere safe?" My aunt lives in Helena. She doesn't know I'm here. I didn't want to involve her in something dangerous, but she'd take us in. Isaiah nodded, all right. When I give the signal, scream, then stay hidden behind these crates. I'll bring Mink to you and we'll figure out the next step. The bidding had reached $35. Time was running short. Isaiah moved casually toward the edge of the crowd, positioning himself closer to the auction block. He caught Elizabeth's eye and nodded. Her scream split the air like a knife. Fire, fire in the stables. The horses are loose. The effect was instantaneous. Half the men turned toward the street, several running to check their own mounts. Murray cursed, gesturing for one of his men to investigate. In the confusion, Isaiah pushed forward, reaching the auction block in 3 long strides. Ming stood frozen, her dark eyes wide with fear. Isaiah vaulted onto the platform and seized her arm. "Come with me if you want to find Elizabeth Thornton," he whispered urgently. At the mention of Elizabeth's name, understanding flashed across Ming's face. She nodded once, and Isaiah pulled her from the platform, using the milling crowd as cover as they ducked behind a wagon. "Hey, where's the Chinaman going?" someone shouted, but by then Isaiah had guided Ming to the crates where Elizabeth waited, her face pale but determined. "Ming," Elizabeth embraced the older woman, tears streaming down her face. "I thought I'd never find you." "Miss Elizabeth," Ming responded, her voice thick with emotion. "You should not have come, too dangerous." "We need to move," Isaiah interrupted, acutely aware of the shouts behind them as Murray realized what had happened. "They'll be looking for us any minute." "Where can we go?" Elizabeth asked. Isaiah made a quick decision. "My horse is at the livery. We can make it to my ranch by nightfall." "It's not much, but it's defensible." They slipped through the narrow space between buildings, emerging onto a side street that led away from the main road. Isaiah kept them close to the shadows, avoiding the few townsfolk who appeared. By the time they reached the livery, shouts could be heard from the direction of Murray's. Hank looked up in surprise as they entered. "Isaiah, what's all the commotion about?" "No time to explain. I need my horse fast." Hank's gaze traveled from Isaiah to the 2 women, understanding dawning in his weathered face. "You're in it now, aren't you, boy?" "Seems that way." Hank nodded slowly. "Take the bay mare too, she's gentle but strong. Bring her back when you can," he paused, "or don't, she's been eating more than she's worth anyway." Isaiah clasped the older man's shoulder in silent thanks. Within minutes they had both horses saddled. Elizabeth and Ming would have to ride double, but the mare could handle their weight for the 5 miles to his property. As they mounted in the livery's back corral, Isaiah felt the weight of what he'd just done settle over him. He'd broken his cardinal rule, never get involved, for a woman he'd just met and her Chinese servant. What madness had possessed him? Yet looking at Elizabeth's determined face as she helped Ming onto the mare behind her, he couldn't bring himself to regret it. Something about her courage, her willingness to risk everything for loyalty, stirred something long dormant within him. "We need to ride hard," he said, swinging into his saddle. "They'll be searching the town first, but it won't take Murray long to organize a proper search." Elizabeth nodded, gathering the reins with surprisingly competent hands. "I grew up riding, Mr. Evans." "We'll keep up." The sun hung low in the western sky as they galloped out of town, keeping to less traveled paths that wound through scrubland and pine forests. Isaiah led them on a circuitous route, doubling back occasionally to check for pursuit. By the time they crested the final rise that overlooked his small ranch, dusk was settling over the land. The cabin sat nestled against a backdrop of pine trees, a small corral and barn to one side, a creek bubbling nearby. It wasn't much. The cabin had only 2 rooms, the roof needed patching, and the fencing was half rotted. But in that moment, with the golden light of sunset washing over it, it looked like sanctuary. "It's not what you're used to," Isaiah said as they approached, suddenly self-conscious about the property's modest appearance. "It looks perfect," Elizabeth replied softly, "like safety." They dismounted in the yard, stiff from the hard ride. Ming seemed especially exhausted, swaying slightly on her feet. Up close, Isaiah could see bruises on her wrists and a cut above her eye. "Let's get inside," he said, leading the horses to the corral. "You can rest while I secure the place." The cabin was sparse but clean. A main room held a table, 2 chairs, a small stove, and shelves stocked with basic provisions. The second room contained his bed, little more than a frame with a straw-filled mattress. "You ladies take the bedroom," Isaiah said, lighting a lamp. "I'll sleep out here." Elizabeth helped Ming to the bed, murmuring soft reassurances. Isaiah busied himself preparing a simple meal of beans, salt pork, and coffee, giving them privacy. When Elizabeth emerged some minutes later, her face was drawn with worry. "She's sleeping," she said, sinking into a chair. "They hurt her, Mr. Evans. Not just her body, but her spirit." Isaiah placed a tin cup of coffee before her. "What they did was unconscionable, but she's safe now thanks to you." "Thanks to you," Elizabeth corrected, wrapping her fingers around the warm cup. "I had no plan beyond finding her. I likely would have gotten us both captured or worse." The simple admission touched something in Isaiah. Most folks he'd met out west were too proud to acknowledge when they needed help. "You tracked her across 3 states on nothing but determination. That counts for something." Elizabeth sipped her coffee. "What happens now? Murray will surely look for us." "We have tonight at least." "I doubt they'll start searching outlying ranches until morning." Isaiah stirred the beans simmering on the stove. "Come dawn, we'll need to move on. I know some trails through the mountains. Could get you to Helena in 3 days, keeping off the main roads." "You would do that, leave your home to help us." Isaiah shrugged, uncomfortable with her direct gaze. "Can't exactly stay here now. Murray has friends in town. They know where I live." "I've ruined your life here," Elizabeth said, distress evident in her voice. "I never meant." "You didn't ruin anything," Isaiah interrupted. "This place was never really home. Just somewhere to stop for a while." "Is that how you see everywhere, just somewhere to stop?" There was no judgment in her question, only genuine curiosity. Isaiah dished beans into 2 plates, buying time before answering. "I've found it's easier not to get too attached. The West doesn't reward sentimentality." "Yet you risked everything to help 2 strangers today," Elizabeth observed. "That doesn't strike me as the action of a man who avoids attachment." Her insight unsettled him. "Maybe I just don't like seeing folks treated unjustly." Maybe, her small smile suggested she didn't entirely believe his explanation. "In any case, I owe you a debt I can never repay." "You don't owe me anything, Miss Thornton." "Elizabeth, please," she accepted the plate he offered. "And I disagree, you've lost your home because of us." Isaiah sat across from her, struck again by her beauty in the lamplight. The golden glow softened her features, highlighting the curve of her cheek, the determination in her jaw. This wasn't much of a home anyway. 4 walls and a roof don't make a home. "What does then?" she asked. The question caught him off guard. What indeed? He hadn't had a real home since his parents died, his father from a mining accident when Isaiah was 12, his mother from fever 3 years later. Since then he'd drifted from ranch to ranch, never staying longer than a season or 2. "I reckon home is where you're missed when you're gone," he said finally. "Don't suppose anyone would miss me here." Elizabeth studied him over her plate. "That's a lonely way to live, Mr. Evans." "Isaiah," he corrected, "and maybe it is, but it's safer." "Safer than what?" "Than caring too much. Out here, caring gets you killed, or worse, gets someone else killed." The words came unbidden, revealing more than he intended. Elizabeth's expression softened. "Someone taught you that lesson the hard way, didn't they?" Isaiah looked away, uncomfortable with her perception. "We should rest. Dawn comes early and we'll need to be ready to move." Elizabeth respected his withdrawal, finishing her meal in silence. As they cleared the dishes, their hands brushed briefly, sending an unexpected current through Isaiah's arm. He pulled back as if burned, missing Elizabeth's fleeting smile. "I'll check on Ming," she said. "Thank you for the meal." Isaiah nodded, watching her disappear into the bedroom. Once alone, he checked his rifle and pistol, then positioned a chair near the window where he could keep watch through the night. Sleep would be a luxury he couldn't afford, not with Murray's men potentially searching for them. As darkness settled fully over the land, Isaiah found his thoughts returning to Elizabeth. Her courage impressed him, tracking Ming across hundreds of miles, risking her safety to rescue someone society deemed insignificant. It challenged his carefully constructed belief that self-preservation was the only sensible path in this harsh land. Perhaps there was another way to survive the frontier, not alone, but connected to others through bonds of loyalty and care. The thought was as terrifying as it was alluring. Dawn broke in streaks of pink and gold across the eastern sky when Isaiah spotted dust on the horizon. Riders, at least 4, moving with purpose toward his ranch. "Elizabeth," he called softly, moving to the bedroom door. "We need to go, now." She was already awake, helping Ming into a shawl. "What is it?" "Riders coming, likely Murray's men." Isaiah grabbed his saddlebags, shoving in ammunition and provisions. "We'll take the forest trail, it's slower but harder to track." Within minutes, they had the horses saddled and were moving quietly into the pine forest that backed the property. Isaiah led them up a narrow game trail that climbed steadily into the foothills, dense trees, providing cover from searching eyes below. By mid-morning, they had gained enough elevation to look back at the valley. Smoke rose from the direction of Isaiah's cabin. Murray's men had fired it. The sight should have angered him, but Isaiah felt strangely detached. The cabin had never felt like his anyway. "I'm sorry about your home," Elizabeth said, drawing her horse alongside his. "It's just wood," he replied, though the destruction still stung. "How's Ming holding up?" Ming sat behind Elizabeth on the mare, her face stoic despite obvious exhaustion. "I am well enough, Mr. Evans. Please do not concern yourself." "We'll rest at the next clearing," Isaiah decided. "There's a spring nearby where we can refill our canteens." The mountain trail grew steeper as they ascended, forcing them to dismount and lead the horses through particularly rocky sections. Isaiah found himself impressed with Elizabeth's endurance. Despite her refined upbringing, she trudged alongside her horse without complaint, occasionally murmuring encouragement to Ming. By late afternoon, they reached a small plateau that offered both water and grazing for the horses. Isaiah helped Ming dismount, noting how she winced at the movement. "I have some willow bark in my saddlebag," he offered. "Makes a tea that helps with pain." Ming bowed slightly. "Thank you for your kindness." While Isaiah prepared a small, smokeless fire, Elizabeth helped Ming sit comfortably against a fallen log. The Chinese woman was clearly suffering from her ordeal, but maintained a quiet dignity that Isaiah respected. "How did you come to work for the Thorntons?" he asked as he handed Ming a cup of willow bark tea. "I was nurse to Miss Elizabeth when she was child," Ming replied. "Her mother hired me after her birth. When Mrs. Thornton died, I stayed to care for the household." "Ming is family," Elizabeth said simply. "She raised me after mother passed." The bond between the two women was evident in how they interacted, a shared look here, a gentle touch there. It spoke of years of mutual respect and affection that transcended their different stations and origins. "What about you, Isaiah?" Elizabeth asked as they shared a simple meal of jerky and hardtack. "How did you end up in Montana territory?" Isaiah hesitated, unused to sharing his past. But something about the isolation of the mountain, the shared danger of their situation, loosened his usual reserve. "I was born in Pennsylvania. Father worked the coal mines until a collapse took him when I was 12. Mother held on for a few more years, taking in washing and mending." He poked at the small fire. "After she passed, there wasn't much to keep me there. Worked my way west, ranch to ranch, mine to mine. Saved enough to buy that small spread you saw." "All alone?" Elizabeth asked softly. Isaiah shrugged. "Easier that way." "Easier perhaps," Ming observed quietly. "But not better." Before Isaiah could respond, a sound caught his attention, the distant crack of a branch breaking under weight. He raised his hand for silence, every sense alert. "Douse the fire," he whispered, reaching for his rifle. "Someone's coming." Elizabeth quickly scattered the small fire while Ming gathered their meager supplies. Isaiah moved to the edge of the clearing, rifle ready, scanning the forest below. Through the trees, he caught glimpses of movement, men on horseback following their trail. At least 3 moving cautiously but steadily upward. "Murray's men," he confirmed, returning to the women. "They're tracking us up the mountain." Fear flashed across Elizabeth's face, but she quickly mastered it. "What do we do?" "We need to split up," Isaiah decided. "I'll lead them away while you two continue north toward Helena." "No," Elizabeth protested. "We stay together." "It's too dangerous. Ming can't move fast enough in her condition." Isaiah checked his ammunition. "I know these mountains. I can lose them and circle back to find you." "And if you don't?" The concern in her voice touched something within him. "Then you keep going to Helena. Your aunt will help you." "I won't leave you to face them alone," Elizabeth insisted. Isaiah met her gaze directly. "This isn't up for debate. You came all this way to save Ming. Now you need to get her to safety." Ming spoke up unexpectedly. "Mr. Evans is right, Miss Elizabeth. We must think practically." Elizabeth's expression betrayed her internal struggle. "Promise me you'll find us." "I promise." The words felt strangely binding, as if he were committing to something beyond this immediate danger. Working quickly, Isaiah gave them directions to a trapper's cabin a day's ride north, where they could shelter safely. He handed Elizabeth his pistol, keeping only his rifle. Follow the ridgeline until sunset, then descend to the valley on the eastern slope. The cabin is near a waterfall, you can't miss it. Elizabeth nodded, committing the directions to memory. As they prepared to part ways, she suddenly stepped forward and pressed something into Isaiah's hand, a small brass button. For luck, she explained softly, it was my father's. Bring it back to me. Before he could respond, she leaned in and kissed his cheek, her lips warm against his skin. The unexpected gesture left him momentarily speechless. Be careful, Isaiah Evans, she whispered. I expect to see you again. With that, she helped Ming onto the mare and mounted behind her. Isaiah watched them ride northward along the ridge, Elizabeth's straight back and golden braid disappearing into the trees. Only when they were out of sight did he pocket the button and turn his attention to the pursuers below. Moving with deliberate noise, Isaiah traveled eastward, leaving obvious signs of passage, broken branches, disturbed earth, even a discarded canteen. After a quarter-mile, he heard the men change direction, following his trail instead of continuing upward. Isaiah smiled grimly. Now the real hunt would begin, only he wouldn't be the prey. For 2 days, Isaiah led Murray's men on a grueling chase through the mountains. He used every trick he'd learned from years on the frontier, crossing streams to mask his scent, doubling back to create false trails, moving through rocky terrain that held no tracks. By the second evening, only 2 men remained in pursuit, the others having either given up or become separated. On the third morning, Isaiah set an ambush at a narrow pass, positioning himself above the trail with a clear view of the approach. When the 2 remaining pursuers appeared, one he recognized as Murray's foreman, the other a hired gun from town, Isaiah called down from his position. That's far enough. The men reined in their exhausted horses, hands instinctively moving to their weapons. You're making a mistake, Evans, the foreman called back. Murray's offering $50 for the Chinaman and another $50 for the blonde. Turn around and ride back to Silver Creek, Isaiah responded, keeping his rifle trained on them. Tell Murray his merchandise is gone for good. The hired gun spat into the dust. You willing to die for a couple of women? Are you willing to die trying to take them? Isaiah countered. A tense silence stretched between them. Finally, the foreman nudged his horse backward. This isn't over, Evans, Murray doesn't forget. Neither do I, Isaiah replied coldly. Remember that when you're thinking about coming after us again. The men exchanged glances, then slowly turned their horses and began descending the trail. Isaiah kept his rifle ready until they disappeared from view. Only then did he allow himself to breathe easily. Now he needed to find Elizabeth and Ming. Following his own directions, Isaiah reached the trapper's cabin near dusk. Smoke curled from the stone chimney, a welcome sight after days of cold camps. As he approached, the door swung open and Elizabeth appeared, rifle in hand. Isaiah, relief flooded her features as she lowered the weapon. Thank God you're safe. He dismounted, suddenly aware of his exhausted state. Murray's men have turned back, for now at least. Elizabeth crossed to him quickly, her eyes scanning for injuries. Finding none, she surprised him by wrapping her arms around him in a fierce embrace. I was so worried. The warmth of her against him broke something open inside Isaiah, a wall he hadn't even realized he'd built. His arms came around her, holding her close as he breathed in the scent of her hair. I promised I'd come back, he murmured. She pulled back enough to see his face, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Yes, you did, she reached for his hand. Come inside, you must be starving. The cabin's interior was humble but welcoming. Ming sat near the fire, looking markedly better than when he'd last seen her. A pot of something aromatic bubbled on the small stove. Mr. Evans, Ming greeted him with a slight bow. We are pleased at your safe return. Isaiah nodded, suddenly awkward in the domestic setting. The cabin was in good condition. The trapper visits only in winter, Elizabeth explained, ladling stew into a bowl. We found provisions and made ourselves at home. She handed him the food. Eat, then you can tell us everything. Over the meal, Isaiah recounted his evasive tactics and the final confrontation. Elizabeth listened intently, her expression alternating between concern and relief. Do you think they've truly given up? She asked when he finished. For now, Isaiah admitted, but Murray isn't known for forgetting slights. It won't be safe for any of us in Silver Creek territory. Then we continue to Helena as planned, Elizabeth said decisively. My aunt will help us establish ourselves there. The us caught Isaiah's attention. He'd assumed they would part ways once the immediate danger passed, Elizabeth and Ming continuing to Helena while he— What? He realized he had no clear plan beyond ensuring their safety. You could come with us, Elizabeth suggested, as if reading his thoughts. Helena's growing, a man with your skills could find good work there. The offer tempted him more than he wanted to admit. I wouldn't want to impose on your aunt's hospitality. Nonsense, after what you've done for us, Aunt Margaret would insist. Elizabeth's gaze held his, unless you have other plans. Isaiah thought of the life he'd led these past 10 years, moving from place to place, never allowing roots to take hold. The prospect of something different, something permanent, both attracted and terrified him. I'll see you safely to Helena, he decided, postponing the larger question. After that, we'll see. Elizabeth seemed to understand the compromise. Fair enough. They spent the night in the cabin, Isaiah taking the floor near the door while the women shared the small bed. Despite his exhaustion, sleep came fitfully, his mind filled with thoughts of Elizabeth and the unexpected turn his life had taken. Morning brought clear skies and the decision to press on toward Helena. According to Isaiah's calculations, they were 3 days' hard ride from the growing territorial capital. With Murray's men no longer in pursuit, they could take more direct routes through the valleys. As they packed their meager belongings, Isaiah found himself watching Elizabeth, the graceful efficiency of her movements, the kindness she showed Ming, the determination that radiated from her slender frame. In just a few days, she had upended everything he thought he believed about surviving on the frontier. Perhaps real strength wasn't found in isolation, but in connection. Perhaps caring wasn't a liability, but a source of courage. The thoughts were revolutionary to a man who had spent a decade convinced that attachment only led to pain. Their journey to Helena passed without incident. The landscape gradually changed from rugged mountains to rolling foothills, and finally to the broader valley where the territorial capital sprawled along Last Chance Gulch. Even from a distance, Helena impressed with its substantial buildings and busy streets, evidence of the gold that had transformed a mining camp into a thriving city. Elizabeth guided them confidently through the outskirts toward a residential neighborhood of modest but well-maintained homes. They stopped before a 2-story house with a small garden out front. Aunt Margaret's, Elizabeth explained, a mixture of relief and apprehension crossing her face. She doesn't know we're coming. Would you like me to wait here? Isaiah offered, suddenly conscious of his trail-worn appearance. No, Elizabeth's hand touched his briefly. We face this together. Margaret Thornton proved to be a formidable woman in her 50s, with Elizabeth's same green eyes and an expression that shifted from shock to joy to concern in rapid succession upon finding her niece on her doorstep. Elizabeth, good heavens, child, she exclaimed, pulling her niece into a fierce embrace before holding her at arm's length for inspection. Your letter said you were still in Denver. What on earth has happened? And who are these people? Over tea in Margaret's comfortable parlor, Elizabeth related their entire ordeal, her father's death, the financial ruin, Ming's kidnapping, and Isaiah's rescue. Margaret listened with increasing dismay, occasionally exclaiming in outrage at particularly troubling points. The authorities must be notified, she insisted when Elizabeth finished. This Murray person cannot be allowed to continue such practices. We tried the authorities in Denver, Elizabeth reminded her. They weren't interested in helping a Chinese woman. Perhaps not in Denver, but Helena has a territorial marshal who takes his duties seriously. Margaret turned her formidable gaze to Isaiah. And you, young man, you risked your life and home for my niece and Ming. Isaiah shifted uncomfortably under her scrutiny. It was the right thing to do, ma'am. Margaret's expression softened. Indeed it was. You'll stay with us, of course, until you find your feet in Helena. That's very kind, but I wouldn't want to impose. Nonsense, I have plenty of room, and from what Elizabeth tells me, you have nowhere else to go. Margaret's tone brooked no argument. Besides, I know several ranchers in the area who could use a man with your experience. And so Isaiah found himself installed in Margaret Thornton's spare bedroom, his few possessions hanging in a cedar wardrobe that had belonged to Margaret's late husband. The domesticity of the arrangement unnerved him at first, regular meals at a proper table, clean sheets on a comfortable bed, the rhythms of a household that had nothing to do with survival. Yet as days stretched into weeks, Isaiah discovered an unexpected contentment in this new routine. Margaret proved to be not only a gracious hostess, but also a valuable connection to Helena society. True to her word, she introduced Isaiah to several prominent ranchers, one of whom offered him a position managing a substantial cattle operation north of the city. "It's good land," Henry Daniels told Isaiah as they rode the property boundaries. 2,000 acres, 300 head of cattle, previous foreman retired to Oregon. "I need someone who knows livestock and can handle men." "It's a big responsibility," Isaiah observed, impressed despite himself by the well-maintained ranch. "Pays good, $60 a month plus room and board." "Comes with a cabin on the property," Daniels studied him shrewdly. "Margaret Thornton vouches for you, and that counts for something in these parts." Isaiah accepted the position, moving into the foreman's cabin the following week. The work suited him, challenging but rewarding, with clear objectives and the satisfaction of visible results. For the first time since his parents died, Isaiah found himself thinking beyond the immediate future, imagining a life built around permanent connections rather than transient arrangements. Central to this new vision was Elizabeth. In the month since their arrival in Helena, their relationship had evolved in ways Isaiah hadn't anticipated. What began as shared gratitude for survival deepened into genuine affection, and then, almost imperceptibly, into something more profound. They saw each other regularly, Sunday dinners at Margaret's, occasional outings in town, quiet conversations on the porch as twilight settled over the city. Elizabeth had found work teaching at the local school, her education and refined manners making her a natural fit for the position. Ming, recovered from her ordeal, helped manage Margaret's household and had begun taking in fine sewing from Helena's more prosperous residence. On a crisp autumn evening 6 weeks after their arrival, Isaiah arrived at Margaret's house for dinner to find Elizabeth alone on the porch swing, wrapped in a shawl against the evening chill. "Aunt Margaret and Ming have gone to deliver a dress to Mrs. Hollister," she explained as he sat beside her. "They'll be back shortly." Isaiah nodded, suddenly aware of the rare privacy. "How was your week at the school?" "Challenging but rewarding. The Wilson twins are determined to test my patience at every turn," she smiled fondly. But young Thomas finally managed his multiplication tables. "You're good with them," Isaiah observed. "The children, I mean, they're fortunate to have you as their teacher." Elizabeth's cheeks colored slightly at the compliment. "Teaching gives me purpose. After everything that happened in Denver, I needed that." "You never really told me about your life there," Isaiah realized. "Before everything went wrong." Elizabeth was quiet for a moment, her gaze distant. "It was comfortable. Father's shipping business did well. We had a fine home, social connections, the right invitations," she sighed. "But looking back, it feels hollow somehow. I went to all the right parties, said all the right things, yet never felt truly seen." "And now?" Isaiah asked, genuinely curious. Her gaze returned to him, clear and direct. "Now I feel as though I'm finally living honestly. The hardships we face stripped away pretense. I discovered what truly matters." "And what's that?" "Loyalty, courage, connection." Her hand found his on the swing between them, the willingness to risk everything for what's right. The warmth of her fingers entwined with his scent, a current through Isaiah's body. He'd been fighting his growing feelings for weeks, convinced that someone like Elizabeth, educated, refined, with connections to a better world, couldn't possibly see a future with a drifting cowboy. Yet the way she looked at him now, with such open affection, challenged that assumption. "Elizabeth," he began, uncertain how to express the tumult of his emotions, "these past weeks." "Getting to know you properly." "Yes," she prompted gently when he faltered. Isaiah took a deep breath. "I've spent 10 years avoiding attachment, convinced it was the only way to survive out here. But you've shown me there's another path, that connection gives strength rather than taking it." Elizabeth's eyes shimmered in the fading light. "Is that what I've shown you?" That and more. Isaiah found himself moving closer, drawn by an irresistible force. "You've made me want things I thought I'd never have, a real home, a future, someone to share it with." "Isaiah Evans," Elizabeth whispered, her free hand coming to rest against his cheek. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" "I'm saying I love you," he admitted, the words finally breaking free after weeks of restraint. "I think I have since that first day at the auction when you stood there so fierce and determined, ready to save someone you loved no matter the cost." Joy bloomed across Elizabeth's face. "And I love you, your courage, your integrity, the man who risked everything for strangers because it was right." When their lips finally met, It felt to Isaiah like coming home after a lifetime of wandering. Elizabeth's kiss was both tender and passionate, a promise of all they could be together. The sound of approaching footsteps finally separated them, though Elizabeth kept her hand firmly in his as Margaret and Ming returned from their errand. Margaret took one look at their entwined hands and flushed faces and smiled knowingly. "Well, it's about time," she declared, ushering Ming inside. "We'll give you two a few more minutes of privacy." Once alone again, Isaiah turned to Elizabeth. "I should speak to your aunt properly, ask her blessing." Elizabeth laughed softly. "I think she's already given it, but yes, tradition must be observed." The following Sunday, Isaiah arrived at the Thornton home in his best clothes, a small velvet box in his pocket. The modest ring inside, a sapphire surrounded by tiny pearls, had cost 2 months' wages, but the jeweler had allowed him to pay in installments. Margaret received his formal request with dignified approval, though her eyes twinkled with satisfaction. "I suspected from the beginning that you were a man of character, Mr. Evans." Elizabeth could do no better. When Isaiah knelt before Elizabeth in the parlor and asked for her hand, her joyful acceptance felt like the culmination of a journey neither had anticipated when they first met behind Murray's trading post. They were married the following spring in Helena's Episcopal Church, with Margaret giving the bride away and Ming standing proudly beside Elizabeth. The Daniels Ranch hands turned out in their Sunday best, and several of Elizabeth's students scattered flower petals along the aisle. As they exchanged vows, Isaiah reflected on the extraordinary chain of events that had brought them to this moment. If he hadn't been in Silver Creek that day, if he hadn't noticed Elizabeth watching the auction, if he hadn't broken his own rules about getting involved, none of this would have happened. Some might call it chance, but Isaiah preferred to think of it as destiny. 6 months after their wedding, Isaiah received an unexpected letter from Hank, the livery owner in Silver Creek. Murray had finally faced justice, not for his human trafficking, which the local authorities still ignored, but for shooting a prominent rancher during a dispute. He would hang before winter. "Sometimes justice comes by strange paths," Elizabeth observed when Isaiah shared the news. "Indeed it does." He placed the letter aside, turning his attention to the plans spread across their dining table, blueprints for the house they would build on land they had purchased adjacent to the Daniels Ranch. The modest parcel, 160 acres of good grazing land with a creek running through it, represented their future. Isaiah had continued managing the Daniels operation while slowly building their own small herd. Elizabeth divided her time between teaching and helping Isaiah plan their ranch. As they reviewed the house plans together, Isaiah found himself marveling at how completely his life had transformed. The man who once believed attachment was a liability now found his greatest strength in the connections he'd formed, with Elizabeth, with Ming and Margaret, with the community they were building around them. "What are you thinking?" Elizabeth asked, noticing his distraction. Isaiah smiled, drawing her into his arms. "I'm thinking about that day at the auction, how I saw you standing there and thought you might be in danger." "You saved me," she said softly. "No," he corrected, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "We saved each other." Outside their window, the Montana sunset painted the land in gold and crimson, a fitting backdrop to the home they were creating, not just the physical structure they would build, but the life they would share. A life founded on courage, loyalty, and the transformative power of love on the American frontier.